One of the earliest hot takes I made on this channel, about 6 years and 70 pounds ago, was that one should not debate fascists. People did not like that I said this. They felt that I was being a stinky boy, giving a stinky opinion. The threat, as I perceived it then, was that fascists would manipulate good faith debate in order to gain a platform, that they would weasel their way into the political mainstream by tricking their opponents into giving them free airtime and access to their audience by being deliberately provocative and sensationalist, that by treating their opinions like something we can debate in good faith, their ideas would become accepted as normal. So, do you see why I was worried about that now? Do you see what I meant about all that stuff I said? Got it in one, I'd say. That's the stuff that happened. Like all burdened with the gift of foresight, I watched helplessly as the world I envisioned came to pass. But I'm not here to assign blame.
Today, anyway.
I'm not here to gloat. I have nothing to gloat about, because despite being correct, as usual, I didn't convince anyone. I was scorned and hated then, just as I am now. So, now what, right? Like, the fascists are everywhere, under every rock, controlling every website, seizing or just being handed power everywhere around the globe. Deplatforming doesn't make sense as a strategy anymore. You can't deny them a platform. They already have all of the platforms. But you still can't treat their murderous ideology and resultant murderous actions as though they are normal, something to be expected or worse, tolerated. They're not normal. They're what social scientists call fucked up Nazi bullshit. So how do we speak back to fascism without giving fascists the attention and legitimacy they want? That's the question I've set for myself today. And make no mistake, it is a small potatoes question in the grand scheme of anti-fascist resistance. The real work is, obviously, community support, civil disobedience, armed resistance, and a bunch of boring care work that nobody thinks about. But I can't help you with that. I'm a moron. But that means I know how morons think. And in the war against morons, I'm your secret weapon, your moron on the inside. You see, I do have a very broad answer to the question I posed, that stuff I just said about how we talk back to fascism without giving them legitimacy. But before I can explain it to you, we have to lay some groundwork. We have to understand how fascists argue and how come they does do it that way. I genuinely don't think most people understand either, and that fact, if not corrected, might kill us all, so it's kind of important. Here's the thing about fascists. Here's the thing you absolutely need to understand before we can proceed. They're losers. Each and every one of them, it is a loser movement for losers by losers. Firstly, like literally, fascism inevitably and invariably self-destructs. It is not designed to win, and when it does, by happenstance, it doesn't win for very long. They are always at one another's throats, always backstabbing and plotting against one another by design. They think that drives them all to be stronger through competition, but in actuality, it makes coordination and teamwork virtually impossible. Fascism is doomed to failure because it is entirely staffed and maintained by incompetent buffoons. Nobody else would have anything to do with it. Everyone else either has too great a critical thinking skill or too much self-respect to become a fascist. To quote Hannah Arendt, totalitarianism in power invariably replaces all first-rate talents, regardless of their sympathies, with those crackpots and fools whose lack of intelligence and creativity is still the best guarantee of their loyalty. Only losers become fascists. This is not a judgment, merely a statement of fact. To become a fascist is merely one symptom of an underlying spiritual loserness. Because when you really boil it down to its core, it is a movement of woe-is-me crybabies. People with some sort of gripe, who are desperate to find someone else to blame instead of doing something about it. People who feel owed power and control and see the absence of that power and control as a humiliating insult. To be asked to earn power or privilege is a slap in the face. They should just have it because they're daddy's special boy, the best, most masterest race, or the smartest, most enlightenedest civilization, or they're the good religion that God likes. Sometimes, by sheer coincidence, their grievances happen to be legitimate, just directed towards the wrong target. Maybe they're poor or unemployed, and instead of getting angry at the rich and powerful, the people who are actually always responsible for that, they instead choose to believe it's because of immigrants, or secret Jewish conspiracies, or DEI, or welfare, or some shit, usually because the rich and powerful are quite aware that cultivating this myth benefits them, not only keeping people off their back, but granting them an easily manipulated audience willing to do violence on their behalf as a fun little bonus. Mostly, their grievances are entirely frivolous. That they have to accept school integration, or that their grandkids are trans, or that a woman might have sex without being punished for it. The oppression they believe themselves to be facing is simply that their prejudices have fallen out of fashion, that people get mad at them when they're shitty, or that they can no longer out loud proclaim their perceived superiority to some minority group without politely being asked to leave the Olive Garden. All of these guys are so happy to get to say the R word again. That is the sum total of their ambitions, permission to be cruel and thoughtless. And they don't care who they have to kill to get it, because they're weird, fucked up losers with stupid, miserable priorities. Fascism always requires an enemy, an opponent who they can imagine has perverted the natural order in which they are on top. When it's not immediately clear who that enemy might be, they're happy to just make one up or blame some outgroup they already didn't like, often, though not always, Jews. Fascists need an enemy because fascism is a movement of people who are unhappy, but who are also deeply unwilling to investigate why or change anything about themselves or their lifestyle. They are perfect as they are. They always have been. Things used to make sense when they, or people like them, were in control, or they perceived people like that to be in control, so the world must change back to that standard in order to oblige them. And do you see how that belief, right? Do you see how the belief that like they're perfect and the only reason they're not rightfully heralded as a superior being is because someone else fucked them over might appeal to like a great big loser, a fantasist without any grasp on reality, a mediocre person without anything to offer the world who can't emotionally process their inadequacies and need to find someone else to blame for why life didn't go their way? It's not that they're not good enough to get what they want, it's because the whole world isn't fair, or rather, isn't unfair in their favor anymore, like it should be. Even when they're inarguably successful, rich and powerful beyond most people's wildest dreams, hypothetically, off the top of my head, I don't know, the richest man in the world, they just have such loser energy. They're bitter, unhappy, completely preoccupied with petty little grievances, no matter how much wealth, power, and prestige they manage to accrue.
I mean, you had Tim Waltz, who was a huge jerk, running around on stage with a Tesla stock price, where the stock price had gone in half. And he was overjoyed. But what an evil thing to do.
They can't help it. They are losers. It is baked in. They can't change it. And it's critical that we understand this. I'm not saying this just to mock them. That's a side benefit. It's not hard to mock them. Look at them. It's very frustrating to argue with them. You might have noticed this because you'll never beat them on effort. You have other things to do. You have to go to work, take care of your loved ones, enjoy your hobbies, and have sex. But they have nothing else. This is it for them. This is all they have. Even if it seems like their life should be fulfilling, they make themselves into a miserable loser, on purpose, it seems. Fascist movements, formal or otherwise, operate much like cults. When one joins them, they are at first overwhelmed with the appearance of validation and support. This is called love bombing, and is meant to endear you to them, to become dependent on them to meet your emotional needs. Then, that validation and support is gradually withheld in order to pressure the target into severing ties with the normie world. They drive away anyone outside of their hateful little bubble, so their entire network of social support depends on how useful they can be to the cause. It's the only way they can feel part of something anymore, because nobody else wants anything to do with them at this point. Take a look at Jeepers Creepers Rowling. Once a respected author of derivative children's books, she was radicalized further and further into hate groups because each time she shared a hateful view, everybody who wasn't already brain-fucked was angry about it, and only the people who shared her prejudices ever validated her. That drove her to become more and more extreme in those prejudices to seek their validation. And so, a fascist or potential fascist cannot help but become angrier and more extreme over time. It's the only way to participate, because if you're not constantly signaling support for the cause in new, novel ways, that validation stops flowing. They start to question your loyalties. Maybe you're a plant trying to make them look bad. Meanwhile, anyone who could otherwise talk sense to you requires that you accept you've been an enormous piece of shit. And that feels bad to do. It feels better to stick with the people who are telling you that you're cool actually, and strong and brave, and the bestest, most special type of person. Losers don't do difficult things. They take the easy way out. Everything becomes filtered through this lens. Every action, every statement, every thought becomes an opportunity to signal their support for the cause.
Fucking pronouns!
Everything becomes part of this eternal struggle, a symptom of the rot at the core of society that they are meant to oppose, a chance for them to be visibly, loudly loyal to the in-group. What might feel like a very trivial matter to you is transformed in their mind into a life or death battle against their perceived enemy forces. You might think you're having a silly little argument about Star Wars or comic books or video games or a little meme, but to them, this is a battleground upon which the future of our entire culture, nay, humanity, hinges. Which, of course, makes them very important. That makes their posts very important. It's not a waste of time, actually, Dad. They're fighting to save humanity from the bad guys by making posts, by posting about video games. They are saving the world. They will spend as much time as is required because they have convinced themselves that the whole world is at stake and they have nothing but time. This totalizing attitude also justifies any measures they take against you, because if you're with the people trying to destroy the world, there's nothing that's too bad to do to you, up to and including murder and torture. And they would murder and torture you. They do it right now even, gleefully. Luckily for us, they're also cowards. They have to be, right? A brave person would simply confront their problems instead of becoming a fascist about them. They'll only resort to violence when they know for a fact that there's no threat to themselves, which is why it's critical we never allow them to get to that point. There should always be a threat to fascists should they try to do fascist shit. Until that time comes, they're content to just pester their enemies incessantly, try to make their lives miserable through whatever petty little means they can manage. They are relentlessly tedious. They will soak up as much of your time and energy as you can provide them with, and more. There's no getting ahead of them on this without yourself becoming just as miserable as they are, and that's what they want. Toni Morrison wrote, "The function, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, and you spend 20 years proving that you do. Somebody says your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Somebody says you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdoms, so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing." Now, of course, Morrison is discussing racism, and while all racism is fascist in character, not all racists are explicit ideological fascists. By no means do I want to reduce racism, an extremely complex confluence of behaviors, to something that only Nazis do. I bring this quote up because the phenomenon Morrison is relating here also applies to fascism more broadly. Fascists delight in wasting your time. It suits their purposes to do so because their purposes are just to make you suffer. So you can't ever expect them to be reasonable, ever. They will die on every hill. They will argue about every little point of minutia, forever. They will deny anything you say, no matter how absurd it seems to do so. They will assume the counterposition to every position you offer, play devil's advocate about everything, muddy the waters on every single fact, no matter how inconsequential or self-evident it may be. They will argue that, no, Elon Musk didn't throw up a Roman salute. You can fucking see him do it. And they will look you right in the eye, and they will say, no, he didn't. He did not do that. They'll just deny it, pointlessly. Why bother? We can see him doing it, guys. What are you talking about? They can't possibly mean it. Not even they could be that dumb. They are lying. Fascists lie. And this is where most people get it wrong. Because they do, obviously. They lie, yes. They also believe their lies, sort of. Even when they know they're lying, they believe their lies. Not because they're dumb, though, but for a far more insidious reason. What I think a lot of people fail to understand is that fascists view truth differently than regular people. From their perspective, and this is going to sound strange, but please bear with me, speaking a falsehood isn't necessarily lying. A statement can not reflect reality, but still be true to a fascist. When most people think of truth, we view it as more or less like that which accords with reality. Something is true if it matches what we see or experience or can measure. I'm talking in very broad strokes here, obviously. It's not that simple. Like, we can't measure that you love your dog, for instance, but nonetheless, I accept it as true. Entire college courses could be taught on the philosophy of what is and is not truth, but more or less, that's how we mean it when we use the word day to day, right? Fascists, like all authoritarians, do not view truth remotely like this. To their mind, truth is not dictated by reality. It's actually the opposite. It works the other way. Reality is dictated by their truth. Truth, or rather their idea of truth, is the foundation from which reality is built, and therefore, nothing within reality could be invoked to contradict their truth. Reality is lesser. Reality is always changing. It's not dependable. Reality is the earthly and mundane, while their truth is eternal, a higher power. It is transcendent. It is of God. A fascist can view a statement as true even when acknowledging that it's also an outright falsehood. And that seems like a contradiction to you and I. Truth and falsehood are mutually exclusive, but to a fascist, the falsity is merely base reality, which, remember, you can't count on. Truth transcends material reality. Truth is eternal and unchanging and not subject to reappraisal simply because reality contradicts it. That's why J.D. Vance can say with a straight face that it is true that Haitians were eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio, even if he concedes, of course, that it didn't actually happen. It's true, but that doesn't mean it happened. This is called the mythic truth, the truth which transcends reality. What that mythic truth represents is truer than true. The mythic truth simply is. It need not be justified. It need not be proven. It cannot be falsified. It cannot be questioned. It is fixed, unchanging. It has always been thus, and so it will always be thus. The mythic truth in the minds of a fascist has been discovered over and over throughout history, embraced, leading to all of the great civilizations of the past, and then suppressed, leading to those civilizations' downfall. Fascism is syncretic. It takes ideas and concepts from multiple sources and tries to synthesize them into a broad, sweeping set of principles that they can apply backwards in time. To question the mythic truth is therefore, in their minds, not simply a matter of disagreement, but to defy the will of nature, to stand in opposition to what they see as the animating force of the universe, to invite the fall of civilization, causing humanity to backslide into barbarism. So anything which contradicts the mythic truth is fundamentally evil and must be rejected on that basis, and that basis alone. When evidence contradicts the mythic truth, the evidence is lying. You don't need to know how it's lying, what about it is incorrect, or if anything about it is incorrect. You simply know the evidence must be wrong because it can't be correct and contradict the mythic truth. When the mythic truth is shown to be contradictory or self-defeating, they will insist, without a shred of irony, that logic itself is therefore lying. They won't bother trying to explain away the contradictions because it is an act of service to the mythic truth, the highest good, to simply accept it on faith, particularly when reason would dictate otherwise. If anything which contradicts the mythic truth is evil, then dismissing it is an act of good. So by willfully ignoring evidence or arguments against the mythic truth, they show their devotion to it. Therefore, they can cognitive dissonance their way into accepting evidence against their position as further reason to accept that position. Their truth is so strong that it doesn't matter if it seems incorrect, it's still true. And let me say that again for emphasis. Evidence against a fascist position strengthens the fascist's belief in that position. I'll give you an example of this that might be familiar to you. Fascists will often say that there are only two genders. Everyone is either male or female. You're born that way and there's no changing it and there's nothing else one can be. Now, I'm not saying that if you believe there are only two genders, you're a fascist. You might just be a stupid asshole, but it is a position a fascist would hold and argue strenuously for. It is also a position that is dumb as hell. Rocks for brain shit, like get a grip. There's no evidence for this position. How could there be? It can't be falsified. How do you prove your subjective experience of gender is right or wrong? Are the millions of gender nonconforming people all throughout history lying, all willing to subject themselves to persecution and violence for no reason other than to maintain this fiction? Why? Does that sound credible? Are we to dismiss their stated subjective experience? And if so, what evidence do we accept in its place? Because to my knowledge, none of these dipshits has ever offered any. There is, by contrast, much evidence against this position. The whole premise of a gender binary rests on the faulty assumption of a strict binary of biological sexes, which is both obviously incorrect and also completely irrelevant. Gender is not sex. I think we've been pretty clear on that, my guys. Not only are you dead-ass wrong, would not matter to the discussion if you happen to be correct. Belief in a bioessentialist gender binary is absurd, it's contradictory, and dumb. It is obvious and self-evident that some people's idea of themselves do not align with the gender they were assigned at birth. How then do fascists arrive at this conclusion? Why do they feel so strongly about it? Why do they remain completely unmoved by evidence against it? Why care at all, for that matter? And you might say, well, duh, obviously. It's because they hate trans people. And yes, I'm not a child. I understand that. But why, though? Because if you were to ask them, they would say that their hatred of trans people is rooted in this belief, which of course they only believe because they hate trans people. So isn't that kind of circular? I mean, which came first, the adult human chicken or the large gamete cell? The real reason they believe this, of course, is that fascists, among other assholes, believe men and women exist in strict natural hierarchy. Everyone does, but especially men and women. Anything which might complicate that dynamic is therefore automatically untrue. Men and women must be immutably and fundamentally separate categories if we are to believe one is superior to the other. If the differences between men and women are murkier than they imagine, socially constructed, or worse, subjective, then that contradicts their perfect, eternal, mythic truth. And anything which contradicts their perfect, eternal, mythic truth can simply be dismissed on that basis. It is not necessary to explain why or investigate further. To do so would be a sign of disloyalty. Now sure, they might offer some specious evidence for their case to you. They might make some kind of leap of logic to justify this belief to you, because they know that you value those things. But none of that is why they believe what they believe. If their reasoning can be shown to be wrong, and it always can, it doesn't matter. It was never required for them to believe it in the first place. They will just invent another reasoning. Forever. They'll say you can tell because of genitals, and you point out that doesn't make any sense, there's all kinds of genitals. And they say, okay, well it's the skeletons, you can tell from the skeletons that there's only boys and girls. And you point out how that doesn't make any sense, and they say, okay, it's chromosomes, and you point out how that doesn't make any sense, and so on forever. Kind of like how Toni Morrison described how they just make up the same kind of excuses to justify white supremacy, saying black people's skulls are the wrong shape, or that black people don't make music. It is trivially and obviously wrong. It is nonsense presented entirely to waste your time. It's not the same thing, of course. These groups have different experiences, particularly those who fall into both groups, but it follows the same pattern. When you do manage to do a complete circuit and exhaust all of the bullshit they have prepared, they will always say some variation of the following. Well, it's just the truth, deal with it. Because of course they know what's true already. They need not explain why, they need not justify it, it simply is so. You cannot reason them away from this position, because their positions are above reason, above evidence, above earthly logic. Furthermore, by an amazing coincidence, whatever they decide is true will always be whatever's most useful for their political project. Because think about it, right? In their mind, they're battling for the future of civilization, and that's a pretty strong incentive to rationalize away whatever it takes to accomplish your goals. Would you want to believe that the evidence were stacked against what you saw as the only way to save civilization? And while, of course, they believe that their truth is perfect, unchanging, and eternal, they are all too happy to edit it on the fly when it suits their purposes, to will reality to bend to their whims by changing what is and has always been unerringly true. They don't give a shit if this appears inconsistent to you. They will never acknowledge the consistency, and for all intents and purposes, might not even be able to perceive it. Enemies, outsiders, villains become trusted allies whose moral character has always been above reproach. Positions shift and waver depending on what is expedient in the moment.
Leave it the way it is. There have been very few complaints the way it is. People go, they use the bathroom that they feel is appropriate.
And just look how mad you are. Look how upset you got that I chose to believe a bad, wrong thing on purpose. My commitment to believing this bad, wrong thing proves how obvious and true it must be, because otherwise there'd be no reason for me to reject the weight of evidence. For me to do that demonstrates how true what I'm saying must be. And I have been rewarded for my faith with what I desire most, which is to upset you, to waste your time. So, if you accept the two premises I have presented to you here, that 1, fascists love to waste your time because they're losers with infinite time on their hands, and 2, that the fascist construction of truth is fundamentally irrational and therefore immune to rational criticism, do you see why it is a bad idea to argue with them on their terms? Do you get it now? Do you see how they've already decided what they believe, and their only goal is to distract and frustrate you forever? How if their whole goal is to waste your time with bad faith nonsense to deliberately frustrate and confuse you, how you don't need to let them do that. Ah, but thought swine, you slutty little sausage, I hear you say out loud, word for word, even though you're on the bus. One doesn't argue with fascists in order to convince the fascist. They argue with fascists to convince those who might otherwise be swayed towards fascism. First of all, it's thought slime. I don't know how you got that wrong. It's written all over the... Secondly, that's also a bad idea. I made a part of the video about that for you and I'm going to play that now. Let me know if you like it. Comment below if you liked this part of the video. Imagine, if you will, you are watching a debate between two theoretical physicists. Dr. Sally Pringles is arguing for the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, and Dr. Pepsi Davidson is arguing for the many worlds hypothesis. By the end of the debate, 53% of the crowd of 250 people side with Dr. Pepsi Davidson. Now, you're not a theoretical physicist. Don't pretend you are. You don't understand most of the arguments being made, and you have to take a lot for granted. And if you happen to be a theoretical physicist, okay. Pretend I'm using a different example. Like, what the fuck? You can imagine shit in 13 dimensions, but I gotta simplify my analogies for you. Fuck off, physicists! The person who convinces you won't necessarily be the person who is correct, and if by chance they are, you're really not in a position to determine that to be the case. Real physicists don't know which one is correct yet. The person who convinces you will be whomever is more persuasive, for whatever reason. Maybe one is the more confident public speaker. Maybe you just got dumped in Copenhagen. Maybe Dr. Pringles is your dad's new wife. You come away with your own preconception about which of these two things is true, and at best realize that there's a robust debate for both sides. This is something for other people to decide, something you must keep an open mind about. Okay, now, imagine you did that 1,000 times a day, whether you wanted to or not. Imagine if every single thing you read, every single TV show you watched, everything about your personality and identity were the subject of an unending and indecipherable debate happening everywhere all the time that you were forced to observe and participate in, whether you wanted to or not. That's just a funny joke I'm making. You don't need to imagine that, because that's just what life is like now. Did you hear? Did you hear Captain Crunch is woke? People who were ticklish are back on their bullshit. Snakes, the animal, went on Joe Rogan and said that they think the Civil Rights Act went too far. Why does a snake even care about that? Why do we care what snakes think about that? Snakes have no history of racism. None of us is free to investigate every fucking discourse that pops up in their lives. There is not enough time in the day. Eventually, you'll have to sleep. You can't spend all of your time researching weird internet bullshit and arguing with bad faith imbeciles all day. You're a contributing member of society, not some sort of YouTube video essayist. My life's work has no value. Please go to patreon.com/thoughtslime. Most people see an argument happening. They see two people who seem equally passionate about their positions, and unless they have some reason to be invested in the discussion, they just go on with their day, because what else are you gonna do? Nobody is gonna come to an informed opinion about all of the shit blasted into their brain meat every second of every day. You pick a few things that are important or that interest you, and you get informed about those, at best, and most people don't even do that. For the rest, whether or not we like to admit it, we tend to outsource our critical thinking to the crowd. We base our view of truth on whatever people are saying at the moment, and if enough people say something, it seems credible to us, because we're social animals. Why would so many people say something if there weren't some truth to it, if there weren't some good reason to believe it? This is a cognitive bias that fascists love to exploit, because the main resource they have is a bunch of people willing to talk endlessly. Just talk and talk and talk forever without stopping. They don't care how long it takes to talk over you. They have all the time in the world. They don't care if anything they're saying is true. To them, truth is just whatever they need it to be. They don't care how bad it makes them look, because they already look as bad as one can. Every time someone argues with a fascist in good faith, anyone watching who isn't inclined to look into the matter further comes away thinking, I guess that's a thing people are talking about now. The more arguments they hear about it, the more normal it all becomes, and the more they subconsciously start to think, well, there's got to be something to what they're saying, right? By virtue of the fact that it is being discussed, it must therefore be worth discussing. You see, the danger here isn't that a fascist might be more persuasive than their opponent. I guess that's also a danger, but that's rarely the case, because they're stinky losers with Dumbo ideas. They're easy to make look foolish because they're fools. The big danger is that most people will forget the contents of the argument entirely, of any argument, and simply remember that an argument took place, that two people argued this, and both seemed to believe what they were saying, and how should I know which of them is correct? Do you think they will remember any information or statistics cited in your argument? If you do, how many people sided with Dr. Pepsi Darlington in my quantum physics hypothetical earlier? That was only a few minutes ago. Do you remember? 0%. There was no Dr. Pepsi Darlington. That's a ridiculous name that I just made up. The physicist was named Dr. Pepsi Davidson, who 53% of the crowd of 250 people sided with. And even if you caught on to my genius ruse, do you still think you'll remember that name and that statistic a week from now? A month from now? A decade from now? Long after I've been executed by the state? And if you did remember the contents of the argument, aren't you just as likely to remember lies and disinformation as the truth? lies and disinformation which are much more plentiful because there's really only one truth and you can make up as many lies as you want? Dr. Pepsi Davidson doesn't even exist. Remember, to them, it is absurd to base one's view of truth on reality. That's what weak people without convictions do. If you need evidence for your position, you're too soft. You're not a useful ally, because the minute reality contradicts your position, which it might do at any moment because it's always changing, you'll abandon it. Why, therefore, would they ever engage in good faith argumentation? What could they gain from that? It is us, it is their enemy who takes advantage of evidence and logic. It is incumbent on a fascist to delegitimize both, to make the process of finding or applying either so difficult and tedious that people stop relying on them entirely. Once we can no longer rely on evidence, logic, reason, then their irrational arguments are suddenly on an equal footing with everyone else's. Because when we can't tell the difference between information and disinformation, information ceases to have any power. You might notice that Elon Musk has a real hate boner for Wikipedia. You might notice that Trump really hates the Department of Education. This is why fascists ban books, they scrub data, and spread lies. Access to information only ever hurts their position. It is their prerogative to make sure people remain ignorant. Only an ignorant person would believe them. So they don't argue to convince people, to inform, or even misinform. If they do, that's a bonus. They argue to obstruct. It's crucial that you understand this, right? They argue not just to win the argument, but to delegitimize the process by which one might investigate truth, to make it impossible to tell which positions are and are not supported by evidence. They want to confuse, not educate. They cannot lose an argument because their strategy was never to win the argument. The strategy was merely to have an argument. That's why it's really fucking frustrating to see people gloat about defeating them rhetorically as though that matters. Like it's some great victory to be more persuasive than the guy who thinks being gay is a form of witchcraft. What a genius you must be to defeat that intellectual titan. They don't care. They're not trying to win an argument. In fact, I'm not sure it would be as useful for them if they did, because they want the argument to happen forever. If they won and convinced us, everybody would stop talking about it. They want to keep the question open, to maintain the pretense that this is a matter of legitimate disagreement, that there are persuasive arguments to support either position, that their arbitrary, frivolous conclusions should be treated with the same weight as everyone else's, and in so doing, become something you might not agree with, but must accept as a valid position that others hold. It can't be dismissed out of hand anymore. It requires a response. It requires your time. It must be debunked again and again for as long as they can pretend to believe it. You must waste your time. And this sounds pretty bleak, I know. You'd be forgiven for thinking that this makes fascist messaging just unbeatable. And I don't think it is. I think it's actually spectacularly easy to beat. None of what I'm saying precludes educating people and correcting fascist misinformation. The only time they are granted the advantage I'm discussing here is when they are allowed to participate in that process. By all means, feel free to correct their bullshit when they're not present. That is both good and necessary. Sadly, sometimes they are present. Sometimes fascists are around, and that's a problem we have to deal with. How do we defeat fascist messaging in person, face to face? And again, I think the answer is actually pretty simple, much simpler and easier than you might expect. There's a cost to be paid, of course, one that we need to be more comfortable paying, but we can always easily beat them, so long as we manage our expectations and are realistic about what we can achieve. Defeating fascist talking points is actually almost impossible to fuck up. Because you can defeat any fascist argument with one simple phrase. It always applies. Shut up, you're being an asshole. That's it. That's all you need to say. And here's why this works. While not everyone can articulate why, everyone can intuitively tell that these people are weird freaks. They're hateful, they're destructive, but most importantly for our purposes, deeply, deeply unlikable. And they always will be. They can't do nothing about it. Fascists are haters. As discussed, they must always have an enemy, and everything they say and do is designed to destroy that enemy. And so everything they say and do is always, unavoidably, either an insult or a direct threat to someone. They are always being a huge asshole. Everything they say to outsiders is designed to hide that, to send the message that actually, we're normal, we belong here, Mom said we can be here. They're not. They don't, and she didn't. They're weird, obsessive assholes, and we can leverage that. You must never show them common courtesy. You need to be immediately, emphatically hostile towards them. Make it known that they are not welcome and you do not respect them or anyone who tolerates them. You must extract an immediate, severe social cost to the expression of or tolerance for fascist beliefs and arguments. You must make it known that such beliefs are not something you're willing to argue about, not something you'll hear out in good faith, not something you're willing to budge on, ever, that you will not respect anyone who does tolerate or condone them, that merely by suggesting these ideas, they have trespassed the boundaries of good taste and broken the peace. That may sound severe. It might even sound mean or close-minded or rude. If you're a New York Times columnist, you might think that it's like itself a kind of illiberal use of stochastic violence that a fascist might use. It's not any of those things. It's in fact the common sense way you would treat any asshole. And let me explain why with a helpful analogy. Imagine you're hosting a party, and this guy you don't really know that well shows up and starts loudly talking shit about your friend Amanda. They say Amanda's stupid and ugly, Amanda sucks, and Amanda's worse than everybody else at this party. And the party would be so much better if Amanda got kicked out and they got to have all of Amanda's beer. Would you be chill about that? Like, of course not, right? You would tell that person to fuck off and leave. They're being an asshole. You wouldn't feel obligated to hear them out. You wouldn't get into a polite debate about Amanda's merits. You wouldn't try to convince them that actually, Amanda's pretty cool. She's good at Smash Brothers and you like her dog. Because if you care about Amanda, and this guy's going around like ginning up hate for Amanda, you would kick him out of the party by force if necessary. Obviously, right? They're being an asshole. You don't have to let them do that. That behavior sucks. Why then? Would you behave any differently when they're doing the exact same thing, except that instead of insulting one individual Amanda, they're instead insulting entire categories of Amandas? When they claim that their race or their sexual orientation or their religion makes them better than all Amandas in the world, someone who wasn't simply being an asshole at a party, but actively using the levers of power to harm Amanda and all Amandas like her. That is categorically worse. Far more Amandas are being insulted, Amandas are having their fundamental human rights taken away, Amandas are losing protections granted to them by the government, and they're being made second-class citizens, and they're being harassed and killed in the streets. Why would you be willing to hear that out? To debate the merits of the Amandas they're targeting? Why would you approach that in open dialogue? Why would it matter how politely they express their hateful intent to destroy Amanda? If somebody says they're going to kill your friend, you don't say, allow me to offer a counter-argument, good sir. And make no mistake, that is the end goal. To kill entire categories of human being. And if that isn't enough motivation for you, remember, those categories are negotiable and might soon include you if they don't already. Now, obviously, we can't kick fascists out of the world like we could kick an asshole out of a house party. But we can do the next best thing. We can expose them and make it known that they are not welcome in our spaces. Fascist thrives when they are granted respect and legitimacy, and they wither and shrink away when that legitimacy and respect are rightfully withheld. Thus, they will do everything in their power to appear legitimate and respectable, to pretend as though, actually, they're not being assholes. They're actually doing a different thing that you don't dislike. It's a meme, didn't you know? It's ironic. Actually, it's all about ethics in games journalism, or we have economic anxiety, or we're making some inscrutable point about free speech, or don't you think Israel has the right to defend itself? There is nothing a fascist hates more than other people observing them and describing their behavior. It is their kryptonite. They need to hide. Just don't let them hide. When you notice this, you kind of can't unsee it, right? Like, they always panic and get defensive if you just describe them. They will insist that you're not allowed to do that. It's bad to do that. It makes you look bad when you describe what they're doing, they'll say. Because they know their beliefs, their project is deeply unlikable. Every other political group on the planet is eager to tell you what they believe, because they think, rightly or wrongly, that you'll agree. Fascists know that you won't. They will always hide what they want. They will pretend not to be saying what they are obviously saying, because they know nobody likes it. They'll gleefully post white supremacist memes like right out in the open, but the minute you call them racist for it, they will shit and piss their entire pants about it. It drives them up the wall. How dare anyone call me racist simply because I said and did things to disparage other races? You don't know what's in my heart, knowing, as we do, that any attempt to justify their beliefs is meant to deliberately waste your time and dwindle your spirit. You just don't give them the opportunity. You don't get sucked into whatever lies and bullshit they throw out to confuse the issue. You don't engage with whatever nonsense they're making up in the moment. You let them spin their wheels, let them sputter uselessly, shadowboxing with an imagined enemy, while you remain focused on what matters. That they are assholes, that they need to shut up and also go away. You don't let them change the subject. You don't let them lead the conversation. You keep it focused on how they're being an asshole. Look how what you're saying is going to hurt people. Look what a weird freak you're being about it. I don't want to be around you. Nobody does. Because you're being a huge asshole. 3 key principles inform this approach. 1. Staying on message. Maintain control of what the conversation is about. Don't let them lead you into a discussion about something else to confuse or sanitize the issue the minute they start losing. Every time they attempt to throw out some nonsense, simply repeat your point. Plainly state what is at stake, what they are doing, and do not allow them to obscure it. If pressed, say something like, "We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about this," and repeat your talking point. Number 2, if you're explaining, you're losing. One of the reasons fascists love misinformation so much is that when you debunk it, even when you're right, it makes you look suspicious. Because, the more you have to explain yourself, the less credible you appear to people. People naturally start to assume you just have some canned line to dismiss criticism. After all, how is it possible that every point that the fascist makes, and they make so many, is either dishonest or wrong? So, don't. Don't explain why they are wrong. Just call bullshit. You don't need to explain why it's bullshit. You let them try to explain why it's not. Put them on the back foot. They can't give evidence to support their positions. They don't believe in evidence, and there isn't any evidence for their positions. Let them twist in the wind, explaining themselves. Number 3, fascists are, by definition, hateful. Hate looks bad. Generally speaking, human beings tend to value kindness and dislike cruelty. Do not let them hide or obscure their hatred and cruelty. Make sure the conversation remains focused on exactly that they are being hateful. Look, everyone, look how hateful this is. And you don't need to explain why that hate is bad. It is generally understood that hate, in and of itself, is a bad thing. Let me give you an example of this strategy being deployed successfully. This is a clip from Real Time with Bill Maher, wherein Ben Affleck argues with Sam Harris and Bilbis himself about whether Islamophobia is a real concept, a thing which exists on Earth. Now, Ben Affleck, generally speaking, is not considered to be a public intellectual. I don't know if that's controversial to say. I certainly don't know the man, but his reputation, particularly at the time, is that of a himbo. A handsome-leaning man, but one of very little substance. And I doubt very much that's how he is as a guy. He's a award-winning screenwriter. But that's how he was seen, especially then, right? He was the star of Gigli. Maher and Harris, by contrast, somehow, defying all logic and reason, are considered public intellectuals. People think they're smart, worthwhile political guys. So they begin this conversation with all of the respect, all of the prestige. It is very much their argument to lose. I will leave it for others to decide whether Bill Maher or Sam Harris are explicitly ideologically fascist. Personally, I think both are just useful morons who are happy to hobnob with fascists, but I also think that difference doesn't matter even a little bit. What does matter for our purposes is that they are arguing like a fascist might, using the strategies a fascist would use to defend a position which happens to be one that a fascist would hold. They start with a premise that the concept of Islamophobia is simply a shield that liberals use to defend Islam, even though that they should personally be allowed to be weird, bigoted creeps about Islam without people being allowed to get mad at them.
We have been sold this meme of Islamophobia, where every criticism of the doctrine of Islam gets conflated with bigotry toward Muslims as people.
Right.
And that is it's intellectually ridiculous.
Good point, Sam Harris. Every time you criticize Islam, people take it as though it's some sort of criticism of Islam. When actually what it is a riddle. It's a magic riddle for you to solve.
But Affleck keeps bringing the subject back to what matters. Look at how cruel you're being. Look how bigoted and gross what you're saying is.
You're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing. It really isn't.
I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people. And that's a problem.
Big of you.
But the
The second this premise is challenged, they retreat and instead attempt to assert their legitimacy and respectability. They're reasonable people, and you're not allowed to treat their opinions as unreasonable, actually. That's rude, and you have to be above that. You're not allowed to discuss how what we're saying might hurt people. You have to discuss these ideas in a kind of vacuum where history didn't happen.
I'm actually well educated on this topic.
I'm asking you. So
You're not listening
Absolutely
to
not.
what we are saying.
you guys.
And you can see how frustrated this makes Marr and Harris. They just can't accept that Affleck refuses to engage with the dry-sounding minutiae they prefer to discuss, the boring, sanitized justifications for their prejudice.
Ben, let me unpack this. Let me unpack this for you.
Please do. I've been waiting. Luggage has been sitting there packed
just
up.
imagine some concentric circles here. You have at the center, you have jihadists. Those two circles arguably are 20% of the Muslim world.
What are you
Fringe of the
basing
fringe.
that research on?
A bunch of poll results that we can talk about. But to give you one point of contact, 78% of British Muslims think that the Danish cartoonist should have been prosecuted. 78%. So I'm being conservative when I roll this back to 20%.
That completely unrelated statistic does imply you were being conservative about the 20% statistic. But wait a minute, doesn't that in turn kind of imply you made the 20% statistic up? That it was just kind of a guess that you're being conservative about? I thought it was a hard number. I thought it was a hard number that you had research you could discuss about it, but chose not to.
Marr and Harris are bewildered that he's not taking the bait, that he seems so dead set on discussing the substance of what they're saying rather than letting them change the subject. But Ben doesn't play along. He doesn't let them obscure the ugliness of what they're saying behind boring-sounding statistics or platitudes.
Or how about the more than a billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punish women, who just want to go to the store?
Wait a second. Wait a second.
Right. But Islam
But
at
why
this moment
would-
is the mother lode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have
That's just
ideas
a fact.
like blasphemy,
It is
It's an ugly thing.
apostasy.
He just keeps calling it gross. He hammers that home. It's gross.
But why are you so hostile about this?
It's gross. It's racist.
And it is, right? Hate is gross. Look how gross and weird and shitty they're being. Shut up. You're being assholes. And it fucking destroys them. They cannot deal with it. That's all you gotta do. It's that easy. The beauty of this approach is that it disrupts the fascists' primary objective in arguing with you. It takes away their ability to use the conversation to make their beliefs seem normal, to make it seem to anyone watching as though they're reasonable people asking reasonable questions. They're not. And you show people that by not treating them as though they are. Instead, you seize the opportunity to point out what weirdos they're being, to lay bare the pathetic hate at the center of their worldview. Don't let them drop it. Don't let them talk about a different thing that's more palatable. You keep things focused on the harm that they pose, and how humiliated they should feel to be a part of it. They're being fucking losers. And it works because people get it. You can tell. Like, look at them. Look at these fucking losers. They should be ashamed of themselves, but they're not. So let's all get together and make them ashamed of themselves. Now, as I said, this strategy comes at a cost. All things in life do. They will use this, they will use your hostility to portray you, to portray anyone who opposes them, to portray the left as unreasonable and intolerant. They will use this to portray themselves as the victims of censorship. They will claim that we're afraid to confront their ideas because we have no arguments against them, so we simply shout them down. That we hate free speech because why else would you not want to hear someone say a bunch of awful shit? I know. That's not news to me. I know they will do that. Furthermore, I also know that this will be quite persuasive to a lot of people. And please really hear me now. Really listen, okay? Because most people get this wrong, so please hear me. You gotta let them. You gotta let them say those things, except that it will convince some very credulous people. I know it's frustrating, but you can't change it. Because, like, do you think that if you're super polite, if you do what they say and you're sweet and you ask probing questions and you give them a nice big hug and a mug of hot cocoa, that they'll be trapped and now they have to be nice to you? Do you think that they're evil genies and have to obey the rules they lay out? Fascists are haters. They are the haters. Haters talk shit. That's what haters do. You gotta let them hate. Let them say whatever mad shit they want. You can't stop them. They view you as part of a corruptive conspiracy trying to destroy human civilization. Do you think, it will matter to them that you listened calmly and didn't call them names while you did that. Are you a fucking baby? Are you a little baby shitting in your diaper? I gotta calm down. I went way too aggro there for a second. I see that now. My point is that if it is convenient for them to say that you are censorious, prudish, or closed-minded, they'll just say you were, even if you weren't. That will simply become part of the mythic truth and thus immune to questioning or counter-argument. You do not need to worry about giving them ammunition because no matter what you do, they will always manufacture ammunition. Oh, look how impolite you're being. You're not wearing a suit, and that's the reason that we're gonna let your country get annexed. Because of the suit thing, because of how rude that is. They'll tell you that you're not allowed to do this. You can't be angry with them. It makes you look bad. It makes you look aggressive and mean. And of course they will. Because they don't want you to do it. Because they're cowards and they can't handle conflict unless they know for certain they're going to be victorious in advance. Why would you let the haters tell you how to act? They don't have your best interest in mind. They hate you. They're not trying to be helpful. And the fear of being portrayed this way, of being portrayed as censorious, prudish, or closed-minded, which they will portray us as regardless, has held us back from pointing out what would otherwise be completely obvious to everyone who's paying attention. That these people are nightmare idiots, that they want the worst possible things to happen, and they are preposterously dumb and preposterously cruel, like Saturday morning cartoon villains who say more slurs.
You'll pay for this.
They're losers, they're assholes, nobody likes them, they need to go away. Polite discussion with them normalizes them. How dangerous could they be if we aren't treating them as though they are dangerous? If we treat them with respect, as they demand we do, does it not therefore follow that they are entitled to our respect? And I ask you, are they? Are they entitled to our respect? Why would you respect someone who wants to hurt innocent people? Why would you respect someone who bases their worldview on hatred? Those are not respectable qualities. Have you noticed that when you just describe what the Trump administration is doing, or what any of these other far-right ideologues gaining power across the world are doing, it sounds ridiculous to people who don't pay attention to politics. They hear you and they think, oh, of course you're going to say that. You don't like him, but if they were actually doing all of that bad stuff, people would be really mad and people would speak up and fight back. So if you're not mad, if you're not immediately hostile, that kind of trains people to think this way. You're doing the work of the fascist for them because the things they're doing should make you mad and upset. It is normal, quite understandable actually, to be made angry and upset by cruelty, by injustice. So you just you just observe them and describe them plainly, honestly, emphatically. Let go of the concern that your analysis might be labeled hyperbolic or hysterical by people who either aren't paying attention or are themselves nasty freaks with nasty freak political projects. You don't have Trump derangement syndrome. Trump does a lot of deranged things which sound deranged when described out loud. And yeah, that's going to lose people. It will be divisive, as will anything in the world. Anything you say will lose some people. Anything will be divisive. The question we should be asking is, which people do we lose, and how many? Do we lose more than we lose by being sniveling cowards willing to collaborate with fascists rather than speak truth to power? My guess? Probably not. You might say to all of this, so much for the tolerant left. Tolerance is not a virtue, it is a concession. It is acceptance of something you may not like, but cannot change. You tolerate a topping you don't like on pizza. You don't tolerate injustice. We've allowed the far right to confuse tolerance with diversity and plurality. These are not things to be tolerated. These are things to be demanded. Things we fight to establish, maintain, and protect, not something we begrudgingly resign ourselves to. There's no contradiction here. Fuck off with your Karl Popper paradox of tolerance bullshit. These are word games played on paper. We should remain intolerant of bad behavior. That is not the same thing as being intolerant of a minority group simply because we use the same word to describe them both. You need not tolerate those who wish to harm innocent people. To do so is itself an act of harm. It is prioritizing peace and quiet over the safety of the targeted people, like a coward would do. Gavin Newsom, you're a coward. Or a collaborator, I don't know which. You must, at all times, make your hostility to fascists clear. You must be belligerent towards fascism. Because you won't reason them out of their positions. They're not reasonable people. You won't win them over with kindness. They don't value kindness. You can't defeat them by being calm, dispassionate, the adult in the room, because the things they're saying, the things they're doing should make you upset. And when you're not upset, what everybody hears is, these people aren't that dangerous. It is the far right who must be made to be tolerant. who must be made to accept that which they do not like, but will never be able to change. That people who are different from them are their equals and entitled to the same dignity, respect, and protection that they are. And if that makes them mad, then they're an asshole. Shut up.
Oh, ho, ho, what a bitter irony it is. How poetic that in making a video about how fascists waste your time, I wasted like months making it. So I'm really gonna pivot to shorter, snappier videos. This isn't working. In any case, thank you for watching. Despite my tone, I'm very proud of this video, and I hope you enjoyed it and agree with my various takes within it. If the spirit moves you, please visit patreon.com/thoughtslime to pay me for the good job I'm doing. Also, please like and also please subscribe to me. Those are helpful actions you can take. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to eat an entire bee's nest. I'm going to eat a whole bee's nest. And all of the bees are going to have to deal with it.